The time is just gone 9:37 a.m. as we continue with the broadcast this morning, and we are now taking a look at the protests that are taking place in Iran, and joined by Press TV correspondent in South Africa, Hassen Seria. Hassan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and jazakallah khairan so much for your time.
Walaikum salam, Inayat. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yes, Hassan, let's just try and put into context these protests that are taking place in Syria as well. We've heard of judges warning rioters and also the whole question surrounding who is behind this protest, what are some of the underlying issues. And we've heard of the involvement of the likes of the United States of America. We've seen Donald Trump threatening that if Iran violently kills peaceful protesters. He says it is a custom. America will come to the rescue. We've heard about Benjamin Netanyahu backing these protesters as well. Just to understand what are some of the issues that are playing out. Is it purely economic, or is there a lot more that one can actually read into what is evolving in Iran?
Okay, so of course, the reality in Iran is that we have a country that has taken a certain position in terms of where it places itself on the global stage, in terms of international geopolitics, and in terms of various key positions. For example, its position on occupied Palestine. And we've seen the firmness with which Iran has stood almost as a lone country here. In terms of maintaining that stance, and not just a position that is expressed in terms of words, but also one that is expressed in terms of action from the Palestinian resistance on the ground in the Gaza Strip. Even in the West Bank, looking at the support fronts for the Palestinian resistance, whether it's through the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, whether it's through Hezbollah in Lebanon, the resistance in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria as well. We've seen Iran take a very firm stance, both in terms of its comments, its statements, as well as in terms of its actions. So, if we take a look at this period just from 2023, let's leave the history out of it beyond that period, for this period of time. We see that since the launch of the Operation Al Aqsa Flood, Israel, the Zionist regime, has intensified its action and has used this as a excuse in order to try to eliminate all of the resistance more broader than just the Palestinian resistance. And we've seen the extent of that in terms of the destruction, the devastation, and what is effectively a genocide that has been carried out in the Gaza Strip. Then we've seen how Israel started expanding its arm to the extent that it has curtailed Hezbollah in Lebanon. It is talking about a further war against Lebanon as well. In Syria, how it has entered and invaded parts of Syria as well, the attacks on the broader region. And so the current situation that we see playing out in Iran is part of that context, that we see Israel now seeing this as an opportunity after having sort of, in a sense, eliminated or curtailed the resistance all the way from Gaza up to Lebanon and Iraq, that it is now going for who it views as the main entity that is supporting and maintaining this resistance front. And that, of course, would be Iran. Now, we know from the point of the West, and they've done this for decades, is that they use economic pressure, they use things like sanctions in order to reduce nations, to wear them down. And in that way, also with the hope, because ultimately from these sanctions, it is the average person that is affected, that they hope that you will see a revolt of some sort from the people on the ground. And that is what, if we look at these protests a few weeks ago that started in Iran, they were very small protests. They were essentially by merchants that were protesting over the economic situation. Those were peaceful protests. But within those crowds, then, those demonstrations we used to start directing and maneuvering and essentially manipulating the fact that there were these demonstrations for other political ends. And if anyone would like to consider this to be conspiracy theory, as you've pointed out in the introduction, the statements coming out of Washington, the statements coming out of Tel Aviv, occupied Palestine, are very clear that they are behind these demonstrations. And we've seen that in the way that the protests have turned violent, the type of attacks that have been happening, the type of destruction of infrastructure as well that has been happening, and even the violent nature of it, in which a number of security officials, unarmed in some cases, have been killed. And if we look at it at this point in time, the amount of protesters that have been killed are zero. There's no protesters that have been killed. There's not been the type of images that the Western media normally looks for, that they try to latch onto. And to the extent that they've even tried to fabricate deaths. They've tried to say that this individual or that individual has been killed, only to have those very people come out and issue videos and say, but we're still alive. Nothing has happened to us. So these are fabrications. So when we look at this, including to the extent of the former son or the son of the former Shah, Riza Pahlavi, who is also issuing statements now calling for the escalation of the protests, for the overthrow of the state in Iran, and of course being presented almost as a king in waiting by the West. So it's very clear who is behind the current situation that we see playing out.
Yes, Hassan, we know the fact that Iran has always been and will always be on the radar of the likes of the United States of America and also Israel as well, because of the threat it actually poses, and also with the last year with the attack that had taken place on Iran and the response of Iran. We knew at some point in time something is going to give, and when one looks at the modus operandi of the likes of the United States of America, of the likes of Israel as well, as you correctly pointed out, try and destabilize from within. And this is exactly what we are seeing, the instability. And they are trying very, very hard. But again, accusing Iran of what the United States itself is guilty of. I mean, it talks about peaceful protests, it talks about a better life for people, and when one looks at the disaster, particularly under the Trump government at this point in time, the poverty in the United States of America, the joblessness, we see what has taken place in Venezuela as well, where similar tactics were actually used is to create instability and then go for the jugular. And we've seen Trump making certain noises, Greenland, and including Iran as well. So there is a bigger agenda and a bigger picture that is playing out, and these protests seem to be just an excuse.
Indeed, and I think the important thing about this is, again, if we look at the timeline, what is considered to be a ceasefire that has been signed for Gaza, which we know is not a ceasefire because Israel believes that it has the exclusive right to continue massacring people, whether in Palestine or in any of the other regions. And this was very clearly stated by Benjamin Netanyahu at the United Nations, no less, that the Israeli regime used what it classified as a ceasefire agreement in order to now focus on this expansion. And we've seen this, for example, in Syria, where the Syrian regime that has been installed there has capitulated to the extent that they themselves are issuing now maps with certain regions of Syria that has been carved out, that they are recognizing as not even being part of Syria any longer. So when we look at this entire context, now it looks like not just a situation to hype up these protests within Iran, but also to actually move towards this policy of establishing a coup, of overthrowing the Islamic government in Iran, the government that has been a firm supporter, both in word and in action, of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian resistance, to move towards that. And this will make the region a safer one, as they would put it, for Israel. And of course, as you've pointed out, if we look at even the current situation with Venezuela, Venezuela effectively, I mean, the US has made the statements regarding oil and so on, but Venezuela, when we look at it in a particular context in relation to Iran as well, the seizure, the stealing of Venezuela's oil resources is effectively an insurance that the United States has secured for itself in the case that during a major war, Iran goes to the extent of shutting the Strait of Hormuz, which of course is a major route for most of the world's oil, or a good supply of a good amount of the supply of the world oil. So when we look at all of these events in context as well, it places us in a very serious situation in that we see that there is potentially a major confrontation that is brewing, one that will be launched against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the question now arises is what will China and Russia do? And we saw in the situation of Venezuela, they have issued statements and so on, but we've not seen any tangible action. If we even look at the seizure, the American piracy in terms of taking control of vessels that were carrying oil for Russia, ostensibly, that there was no action from these powers, which are viewed within this current context as potentially being the leaders of a multipolar world. So there are many questions that arises from this, but I think the reality or the chances of us seeing some major conflict is certainly brewing, and it is a time for great concern.
Well, certainly, Hassan, and also I think the question is why Iran, in particular, and we know that the answers, many of them are blatant, they're open, they're obvious for everyone to see, but also the ability and the position of Iran on a global stage, particularly when one looks at the global south. You mentioned Russia, you mentioned China as well, and how Iran is actually viewed by these powers like Russia and also China as well, but also the ability of Iran to actually bounce back. Because what we've seen not very long ago, after the attack on Iran and its nuclear facilities, its missile capabilities, have actually created quite a storm right across the entire world in terms of how quick Iran has been able to recover. So, to continue and persisting with creating or maintaining and sustaining conflict within Iran, and how this actually acts, as an in the interest of both the likes of the US and Israel, to make sure that Iran continues to remain unstable, or the instability in Iran, so that they could basically subdue Iran. And again, any progress that Iran is actually making, and also its relationship with some of the other superpowers and many of the powers right across the entire world, is just basically to contain Iran.
I think the important thing is to realize and to understand that when we look in relation to China and Russia, Iran is a smaller partner. But the reality, as you importantly point out there, is if we look at, for example, South Africa at the moment, Russia, China, Iran, and South Africa are about to undertake joint military exercises. So if we look at the situation, despite Iran's being a junior partner of that sort, its critical importance and its capability is viewed here as being of significance. And therefore, it is, for example, part of these exercises that are about to take place in South Africa. And I think also, in addition to that, we've seen with the United States and with the Zionist regime, Israel, that Iran thus far has proved as the only country that has been ready to exert militarily its its power. And this after, of course, many decades of its own sort of restraint as well, that it has done so. We saw this after the assassination of the Quds Force leader Qasim Soleimani, when the Americans, of course, conducted that assassination in Iraq, and the Iranians responded tangibly by hitting American bases that are occupying Iraq. And we've then seen this, of course, during the June attack of 2025 as well, that Iran has demonstrated that it has made certain comments, it has issued its warnings, and despite all of that restraint, there will come a time when it is willing to undertake the responsibility of protecting itself. And if that demands military sort of action, then that is what it will do. Of course, also during the war in June, our understanding is that the expectation of Iran's response, or the reading, the assessment from the Zionist regime, from the West, and I'm not just talking here about the United States, because it was Europe that was also part of that war, and a number of the Arab regimes also that are now forming part of this broader idea of an Israel that sort of exists in an expanded context within West Asia, is that Iran demonstrated that it has the capability to defend itself. And according to what the Iranians have said at that time, is that that was not even the latest or the most advanced of their technology that they have employed, because they understood that at that point in time, that was a certain a sort of attack that they needed to prepare themselves, they needed to send a strong message, and that is what they did. And I think I cannot, of course, speak for the future and say that the conflict that is brewing now, if that does break out, that it will be a war to that degree or so. But Iran has given clear indication, or has demonstrated, that it is, number one, willing to defend itself militarily, and even if that requires that it acts on its own, because during that conflict we did not see, despite the statements, Russia or China get involved militarily, that it will defend itself, and that it has technology that will be able to ensure decisive blows, as well as far as the Zionist regime is concerned, and also from our understanding with the type of technology that has been made public as well, that it can sort of reach even a bit broader.
Well, Hassan, let's leave it at that. But as always, we thank you. Jazakallah so much for your time, and we do appreciate it. Have yourself a great Jummah as well. All the best to you, my brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam and Jummah Mubarak to you and the listeners.
Hassen Seria Press TV correspondent in South Africa, putting the Iranian protests into context. With it, we're going to go for a break. We come back, and hopefully we will be playing out Fired Up with Hafiz Imran Chunara.